I am Valerie Lemmy, Director of Exploratory Research at the Kettering Foundation in Dayton, Ohio. I am a former city manager, public utility commissioner, acting chief of staff, and district director for a congressman who happens to be running for re-election today. Our discussion topic for the next 30 minutes will be disruptors stemming the tide of bad actors in public engagement. I am pleased to join my friends and colleagues, Martine and Costas, for this discussion. So let's begin with their introductions. Costas, please introduce yourself.
Hello to everyone, and thanks for participating. What is happening here is brought to you by technology. We couldn't have imagined such a dialogue 30 years ago, and I'm very pleased to be part of it. Some of you may know me or remember me from my days as president of the Public Technology Inc., PTI, in Washington, D.C., which was a state and local government membership organization to bring innovation and technology into cities and counties. And Valerie was a huge leader in that, member of the board and leader of a lot of initiatives. And I'm currently doing cybersecurity work at GW, as well as advising all county council members in Montgomery County, Maryland. So those of you from Maryland, thank you for your tax support.
Now, Martine, please introduce yourself to the group.
Yeah, my name is Martine Carkson. I'm a communication studies professor at Colorado State University and the founder and director of the CSU Center for Public Deliberation. The CPD serves as an impartial resource for the Northern Colorado community, actually train undergraduate students. And then we do work primarily for the city, the county, school districts, community organizations, helping us have the kind of conversations we need to have.
Thank you, Martine. Now, Shane is going to put up our first poll question. Which of the two kinds of disruptors is your greatest concern? And we have two options for you to choose from. Bad faith actor, someone who is unwilling to engage in good faith conversations and may even gain from conflict. And the second option is conventional bad actor, not necessarily out to sabotage public management, just feel as though they're not being heard or hold beliefs that are at odds with the prevailing opinions. So please let us know what your thoughts are on that, and we can see a bit of the results on the screen. And we'll take a second to see how that works. So far, we've got the majority of people thinking bad faith actors are the key disruptors. Okay. So it looks like it's the bad faith actors that people are most concerned about. So gentlemen, please talk to us about what can these managers do to address bad faith actors in ways that can add to a productive conversation and lead the community to this idea of finding some common ground upon which to act. So Costas, would you please share your thoughts with the group first?
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that, Valerie. Back in 2001, which is in the Stone Age as far as technology for local governments is concerned, I wrote a piece for the National Civic Review titled "The Politics of E-Government, the Upcoming Struggle for Redefining Civic Engagement." And I reread that in preparation for my remarks this morning. And boy, things haven't changed at all. Maybe the technology platforms have changed, but the confusion, the difficulty that we have to engage with different means, this electronic stuff and computers and emails and polls and so on, we're still kind of very slow to adopt and adapt those technologies. I'll have 3 points to make, and then I'll give the floor over to my other colleague. The first one is your disruptor is my voice of conscience. I want to make sure that we don't immediately turn off voices which may not be the right ones. And they fall into both categories, number one and number two. We're in an increasingly polarized nation. The current elections today are going to tell us, I think, the same story, that we're very, very divided. So to the 50% that's on one side of one camp, the other side are disruptors. And that could be me and you. So we have to be sure that we define the word disruptor in a good way. The second thing is when we listen to the public as local government officials, we have to make sure we remember what kind of government we run. And the kind of government we run is called representational democracy. It's not called participatory democracy. It's called representational democracy. We invite people to listen to a small number, maybe 5, maybe 17, maybe 25, maybe 3, who knows, elected officials. And we elect them to take decisions on our behalf. So when we turn on the electronics and say, we want to listen from the people, from the public, what is the role of the elected official? Is it for him or her to simply say, oh, they're wrong, or oh, they're right on target because they're saying what I've been saying for a long time, or do they try to shut down that whole electronic process? We have to be sure that the elected officials are on board. And there is a very, very difficult dilemma when you open a participatory technology in a representational democracy. The final point that I wanted to raise is one of trust. We need to make sure that we remember that the one good thing we have as government officials is trust. And whatever it is we do, however it is that we listen to people, we need to make sure that we retain and maintain the trust that they have in us. We're, for the largest part in the audience, I presume, on the administrative side of government, so we have to make sure that we preserve the trust. Valerie, in the interest of time and of discussion, let me just stop with these provocative ideas.
Sounds great, Costas. I appreciate your provoking our interest, and hopefully everybody is thinking about what you've said. Martin, can you talk about your experience? I know you work a lot with local governments on this particular topic.
Yeah, basically my work the last 20 years has been trying to figure out ways for people to have the tough conversations they need to have and come together across perspectives. And certainly, growing concern about the polarization and those type of things. I agree with Costas of the danger of too quickly assuming people are bad faith actors and dismissing them. So we'll get into that a little bit. I'm going to post something in the chat. I just created a shared Google Doc, which is some of the resources I'll mention. I might add some more as we kind of get into Q&A and so forth. But it has, I've got a little 4 slides, a slide deck that I'll just kind of cover just to kind of organize this a little bit as I go through. But I'm going to go pretty quickly, so I won't dig into all these too much, but hope, happy to continue the conversation afterwards, or obviously we'll have some time for Q&A. The bad news is there's not an easy solution to this, right? As a process designer, as someone who trains facilitators all the time, there's no magic bullet to kind of deal with the disruptor. If someone's there, their sole purpose is to blow up the process. Those are very difficult things to really deal with on the fly, right? So the way I've organized my comments is first, avoid doing things that make it worse. And invite this. Second, some short-term things that you can do, tweaking your processes to make it less likely that disruptors will really be incentivized or rewarded for their behavior. And then a few kind of long-term things that you can think about of building the culture. And that's really the best thing that we can do is how do we build a culture in our community? So those tactics are seen for what they are and kind of dismissed. So we're not incentivizing them as much, right? So the first thing is to avoid, unfortunately, we do a lot of things that tend to reward the bad faith actors and they kind of get more power. So we know from the research, if you were in the introductory session, I talked a lot of my work is informed by social psychology and brain science and how our brain's wired. The heart of my work, I posted an article that I get into this, is how do we design process to avoid triggering the worst of human nature and actually tap into the best. And we know from that social psychology that shaming people or ridiculing people backfires. It doesn't work, right? It actually probably turns a regular bad faith actor into a bad faith actor, right? So now you're almost you're making the situation worse because you're feeding into their kind of problematic narrative in a way. Right. So you see that distinction there. And part of the reason that distinction is important because I think our brain is wired to assume people we disagree with are bad faith actors, because if we make that assumption, if we assume they have negative motives, we can dismiss them. We don't have to take them seriously. And that makes it easier for us but that also just angers them and probably forces them to dig in more. So recognizing that what might seem as a bad faith actor might be someone, it's kind of like the distinction between misinformation and disinformation that we're hearing more and more, right? Misinformation is someone passing on bad information, but thinking it's good information. Disinformation is someone purposely sharing bad information. The bad faith actor knows what they're doing, but I think that there's much fewer people that are truly bad faith actors. So if they think they're acting in good faith, trying to find ways of engaging them and listening to them, incorporating them is important. Or if it's just that they don't feel heard, certainly people get aggravated and louder and when they don't feel heard. Good process that makes it clear that they're being heard often solves that problem. Second, too many of our basic public engagement processes, the public hearing, the citizen comment that are focused just on public input, those reward bad faith actors. I can tell you, running events for 16 years, I've run hundreds of events. I never give that microphone up in front of a large crowd, right? That's just kind of giving them the platform they want. So our process are thicker, kind of deliberative processes, putting people in small groups. That flips the script, right? That disincentivizes that. Someone in a small group who is spewing a conspiracy theory that sees the world through a very simple lens and they're right and everyone else is an idiot seems out of place, right? So then we're changing the kind of behavior that we're incentivizing. And the last one is this danger of assuming, well, the facts are on my side, so I'll just ignore kind of those loud voices, those problematic voices. And that's the other scary thing from the social psychology and brain sciences. Unfortunately, particularly when we're polarized, as we already heard, facts don't tend to work. Facts do have the long-term advantage if they're true, right? They don't go away, but in the short term, they don't have kind of an inherent advantage. So you have to kind of change the way you talk about things. You can't just think facts are going to win out on the end. And sometimes those narrative from the bad faith actors can get a lot of traction if you're just kind of waiting. So I think you have to engage them in some different ways. So the second point I want is looking at some of the short-term moves that you can make, changing kind of processes and thinking about things. And the big one is, this works with budgets in a way, right? You can't just engage the public at the end once you've got the budget figured out and say, hey, yes or no to this, right? You have to engage them earlier in the process. If your process is basically yes or no to something, most people walking in have already said yes or no. They've already made their minds up. They're not there to think. They're not there to problem solve. They're not there to listen to other people. And again, that gives a platform to the bad faith actors. So if you engage the public earlier, you use some of the techniques that help people think differently, get away from yes, no, react to a range of options. I mentioned there, this is pulling from the article that we're working on. I'll post in the link as well. But Shane talks about the importance of designing public engagement to strive for procedural justice, and some of the Get Fair series I'll mention here in his work. And then a lot of my work that I'll share is how do we reframe things, getting away from this simple assumption that problems are caused by wicked people, the bad faith actor, the assumption that the other side is bad, to shifting it to put the wickedness in the problem. And for me, that's what helps shift people from their adversarial mode to the collaborative mode, right? The other quick thing I'll say here is, and this is a key facilitation move I train my students, they're so focused on dealing with a problematic kind of participant, right? The dominator or so forth. And yes, we teach them techniques to do that, but the primary technique to deal with a dominator is to get other people speaking, right? So with managers, I speak, yes, a lot of your time and, that problem person that's always showing up is going to dominate, but also work to elevate other voices, get other people speaking. That's got to be a part of your kind of long-term strategy and in the process design ways. How do you get people there? Because if the dominator is just over talking someone, then you can shut them down, right? Let the other person finish. So where is your attention kind of going through? And in the resource link that I gave you, I have links to all these things, but these, tapping into the thicker deliberation, the facilitation kind of techniques. These are all basically designed to avoid polarization, to make it harder for the bad faith actors to elevate better actors to be part of the discussion, right? So then I'll end here, just the long term, your goal is to kind of build a culture. The good news about the work that me and my colleagues do is it is a positive feedback loop. The more you do this, the easier it is to do, and it starts changing the culture. You start learning how to trigger different parts of our brain. So you can kind of look over those, and in the resource page, I have some links to some of the things that we talk about. But how do we really build capacity in our communities, both within our city governments or municipal governments, but also in the broader community, to help really spark those conversations. And I think that's going to be the best way to deal with this, because you're just not creating an environment that really encourages it, which unfortunately is what we really have right now. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. I do appreciate those comments, Martine. And just to share a little bit from my own experience, both as a former city manager and as a researcher at the Kettering Foundation who works with city managers and finance staff currently. Well, one of the things that I had to decide certainly is, how to spend my time. As city manager, you deal with both types of bad actors. I had to decide, where to invest my time, and that of the council as importantly. The majority of people, as both Costas and Martine have said, they just want to be heard. And I am reminded of the danger of a single story, that if we make an assumption about people, we are likely to make it come true and miss the sort of wealth of information that they have to provide. So you really do need to be cautious about assuming the negative aspect of people's participation. And sometimes our systems, as Martine talked a little bit about, aren't designed to encourage positive communication, or they are so stymied, the only place they see themselves being able to talk is when you're convening a meeting about maybe the budget, and people want to gripe about something else that happened that has nothing to do with the budget, but they see that as their only opportunity. The next thing I had to really decide is to sort of, how do I help people be heard? How do I hear the difference? And for me, it was wanting to hear conversations that people were having in the community about the work that was important to them. And so deliberative conversations where we're not just talking about what can government do, but we really are talking about how do people name the issues that they live with and face every day and are concerned about, that they see a role for government in. What do they see themselves doing in that same space? And recognizing people know that government can't afford to do everything. They pay taxes. So they certainly understand that. But we have to prioritize. And if we prioritize problems that are identified in a community, and people have a chance to talk about what's first, what's second, where there are other resources in the community that might be aligned with or substituted for the work of government, are there other institutional actors and civic organizations, philanthropy coming from a foundation that can also be partners in the work to be done in community. And so having people talk about what they would do, what kind of options they would follow. One of the most successful things that I experienced as city manager with respect to budget was creating a citizen advisory board. In Dayton, Ohio, we were fortunate in having neighborhood associations that were elected. And these elected priority boards always had a role in government and were sort of seen as the public voice. They represented the interests of the community. And so in pulling those voices together, having the priority boards identify a couple of people that would work with the city as it developed its budget. They would do a preliminary review of the budget before it was sent to city council. And then they would send me as the manager their recommendations on not only budget priorities, but departmental line expenditures. And my commitment was, if they took it seriously, we would take it seriously. Department heads would present their budget to the community first before they presented it to the city council. And two things happened from that. One, the citizens understood how difficult it was to put a budget together. And two, they did take it seriously. And so their recommendations were very thoughtful and helped us understand what to expect in a larger community context when everybody in the community was at the table and participating in the hearings, either virtually or in person. So we were prepared, and so were the elected officials. My commitment was to share both the community and the staff budget. Of course, as a manager, I tried to negotiate with the citizens, and where there were differences of opinion, we worked it through. But the key is that people really cared about their community. They cared about government expenditures, the accountability, the quality, the transparency of services. And then they became some of the best supporters for the budget recommendations. particularly those that were the difficult recommendations, that you're going to close a recreation center, or heaven forbid, you're proposing to close a firehouse. People in the community being engaged and informed made such a big difference in that process, that I am pleased to say that all of these years later, the voice of the public is institutionalized in City Hall, and has been a wonderful way of keeping the city and the community informed. One of the most important things that the research at the Kettering Foundation shows is that people in communities care about a relationship with their local government, where public officials care about data and metrics and accountability, productivity, performance. People in a community want a relationship. They want to know what you're doing in the language that they use. They want to understand what that means for their daily lives. And they want to be able to trust when you say something to them that it's true. And when you make a commitment, you will deliver on that. And so building that relationship can be done through a budgeting process that really engages people in thoughtful ways to take responsibility for making recommendations across the board beyond just the aspect of participatory budgeting. So again, thanks everybody for your thoughts and your comments. We have some comments in the chat, and I'll just, Costas, you were very gracious and took just a little bit of time. So I will ask if you see some comments in the chat that you'd like to respond to. We still have about 10 minutes to go.
Yeah, I wanted, first of all, to respond to a comment that was made, and also Martine mentioned it as well, about how do you engage people to drown out loudmouths? And we have a really good example of that in Montgomery County, Maryland, where I advise the county council members in all matters IT. Because of COVID, we had to rethink how do we do public participation, and we encouraged our community to come online and to call or to be on an iPhone. You'd be surprised. First of all, participation from our Latino community skyrocketed. Yeah. Why? Because they didn't have to find a babysitter to come down to county courthouse. They didn't have to get permission from work, because usually meetings are in times that are challenging. So that's a happy story. An unhappy story about bad actors and loudmouths and so on are the kids that are chaining themselves to city halls all across the world on sustainability and climate change. They are by any means, by any measure, disruptors. They're doing stupid things. What are they doing? Chaining themselves to city hall or throwing paint at buildings? What they're saying is enough is enough. Government hasn't done it. So somehow we have to break through. And I think there is quite a challenge for both our elected officials and our administrators to find coherent solutions to an impossible problem. Climate change is a very difficult problem because there is no single actor that can do it. And Valerie, you kind of opened the door by saying government doesn't do it all. We have to engage the private sector. We have to engage nonprofits and so on. But this one, sustainability and climate change, is real. It's coming. And the kids that are chaining themselves to city halls are a bad voice, a disruptive voice, but for a good cause. So how do we deal with that? Yeah. Other than bolt cutters?
Martine, there was some movement on your side. So did you want to add to this conversation, or would you like me to?
Yeah, no, I'll quickly just add the other nice thing about Zoom is the translation, the interpretation works a lot easier, right? I just had I teach in our MPPA program here, and just last night we were focused on online engagement tools and kind of the pros and cons and how much it's completely kind of changed the last few years, right? We used to talk about face-to-face or online, but now this is face-to-face, right? And with Zoom, online things can be synchronous, can be interactive, can be engaging. So yeah, using some of those tools can make it a lot easier to kind of, engage people more productively. While still face-to-face, real people in the same room, breaking bread together, I think is still kind of there's a magic to that we can't give up in a sense. But I think we certainly added new tools to our toolkit with people being more comfortable with online video.
I see in the chat that someone else mentioned the importance of location, and whether it's virtual or it's in person, making it convenient for as many people as possible to participate. And I would add another aspect of that is having more than a single meeting. and not doing meetings in communities only at budget time. And my recommendation is the budget is done every year and you know what time of year that is. Why not go out before and begin with the line departments and begin a community conversation very early about interest and issues and needs and challenges and problems so that they can be reflected in the budget document that you finally present. And it may say that these are a series of issues in neighborhood A. And in this budget, we are proposing to address, 1 and 2, and there's still 3 and 4 that we are working with the community on, trying to develop a consensus of the best response at the most affordable in the most affordable way. So, it doesn't have to be that you have the silver bullet response and decision. And you're going to solve the problem. Some problems are going to be ongoing and they're going to be multiple years, but to recognize it and to recognize that you heard people by putting in their recommendations in the final product. I think where you lose so many people is when they really are not heard. You convene a public participation process and then you don't listen to what people say. They don't see anything reflected in what is recommended, and you don't get back to them and tell them why. And so it's just like any other relationship. It's two ways, and communicating with people is really an important aspect of the governing process, as Costas talked about earlier. Is there any other comment, Costas or Martine, that you're able to see in the chat that we should respond to?
There's one question that John proposed. Shane answered it in terms of we'll have another session, but thinking about the role of public officials here. So I'll say a couple of things here. I imagine you, Valerie, can certainly kind of jump in as well. The work that I do is kind of this deliberative, kind of thicker engagement, takes more time and efforts. You can't do it all the time. So certainly as we're deciding topics, we don't want to pick a topic that, the council has already kind of decided or is kind of clear with their vote. We want to do things that the council is seeking out better information, right? Is wanting to know, to have a better sense of the public voice, and to have, our processes, instead of just, one at a time, the microphone expressing their opinion, we're getting them to engage tensions and do some really important work to kind of think through that, right? So that's part of it is our processes often are requested by the public officials wanting to kind of do this. The other thing I'll mention, and I'll post on the resource guide, is we use the IEP2 spectrum that I imagine a lot of y'all are kind of familiar with, right? Of figuring it out. Certain issues, it is more of a city government issue. The city budget, right, is what the city government's going to spend their money on. A lot of the other issues that we deal with that we're wanting to engage, the city government is one tool, but one tool among many, right? And we're wanting to engage the broader community. We're needing civil society. We're needing nonprofits to kind of, so it depends on the topic. So it's not always, the city's often the convener, the city's often a critical voice, but we want to kind of have a broad conversation across public, private, nonprofit lines with many of the issues that we're needing to deal with, right?
And Martine, I would add a couple of things. One is that the city doesn't always have to be the convener. Depending on the situation and the circumstance, it may be an independent third party is the best one to do the convening. And I'm thinking here about the Center for Public Deliberation and the center at your local college or university, the library, and they often have facilitators at the library, but a space and an organization that people have confidence in. It could be a civic organization. And in my community, the Dayton Foundation is often the convener of many community meetings when we're talking about difficult or challenging problems. And so use other people to convene so that you don't always have to be on stage leading the show, but you can listen. And with respect to elected officials, it is absolutely important to include them in the process as they choose to be included. I don't think any of you would ever convene a meeting in neighborhood A when there was an elected official who felt neighborhood A represented his or her constituents and wanted to be a part of any conversation. And so plan a role for the elected official in the process, briefing them beforehand about what is going to happen, what they should expect, what role, if any, they are expected to play, having them introduce the conversation and the process to the group, but finding a role that is visible without being in a role to commit to resources, because they certainly don't want to do that and shouldn't do that as a single voice among many voters on the city commission. And so finding ways not only to engage the public in the conversation, but your elected officials. And the elected officials should have a conversation maybe before you go out, so they can articulate, what it is that they're going to be looking for from the community, have the session, and then come back and say, and this is what we heard from the community when we went out based on your guidance and your direction. So remember to give credit, to be as inclusive of people as possible within the organization and in the community, and to record and write what you're learning and what you're doing, and how you plan to take information that you're not going to be able to fund in year one, but you might be able to do something out for in year 3 or 4 down the line, since today most communities do multi-year budgeting. And with that, do you see any other comments?
Well, I posted a link. I went really quick on my third slide, but to that point of the convener maybe being, not being the city, right? So I posted a short article that's in the resource page that I shared about the importance of bridging institutions. That's a big part of the long term, right? Communities need these trusted conveners, these trusted, honest brokers of information, and I think one part of public managers is to kind of help cultivate that, right? And if you have existing organizations that can develop into that role, or have, how do you kind of help them sustain that and provide them help? And the other quick point I'll make is, I think one of the reasons that we've dealt with disruptors, or we just haven't had that much of an issue of people kind of shutting down our processes, is because the facilitators at our table are college students, right? And yelling at a city official might make sense, right? But yelling at a college student, so it's this interesting thing. I think that we get people to kind of engage the issue a little bit differently because it is a third party that's kind of coming in, that our mission is kind of clear, that we're there to try to help people have these kind of conversations, right?
Mm-hmm. As we are winding down, Costas, I'm going to ask you to take a minute to offer any final comments, and Martine, I'm going to do the same of you, and then I'll close us out and turn it over to Shane.
Yeah, what I would again amplify on, Valerie, is the strength of technology in all this. I think we've barely scratched the surface. So I would encourage each and every one of the attendees to keep on pushing the envelope and to keep trying new apps, new ideas, especially from the younger people, and especially from people in all parts of the community, not just the traditional ones, because there's a lot of gold in them there. Hilson, speaking of gold, by the way, congratulations to the finance officer of some town in California. $2 billion in the Powerball was just awarded to someone in California. I'm hoping it was a finance officer. They can deed it all to GFOA.
Very good, Martine.
Yeah. Now I'll just go back to where we started of, trying to make some of these tough distinctions between bad actors or just misunderstood people, or people that are critically pushing back on status quo that we really need to listen to. I have these on my resource page. I didn't mention it earlier, but Monica Guzman's got a great new book out that I never thought about that way. She works with Braver Angels, has some great TED Talks that I have a linked in there. But she talks about how, our brain wants to define the people that we disagree with by what they're against, right? We want to frame them against positive things that we care about. And that's what partly fuels the polarization and our inability to kind of talk to each other, right? So recognizing that. But on the same sense, Amanda Ripley is a journalist that's done some really cool work on conflict, got trained in conflict resolution and applying that to journalism. A great article called Complicating the Narrative, which is a great read. I'll put that link in there too. Dan has a new book called High Conflict, but she talks about the growing implication or the growing these conflict entrepreneurs, right? Which are bad faith actors, people that are getting rich, that are getting a lot of attention by feeding these simple narratives, by taking advantage of human nature. So we do have bad faith actors, right? There's a danger of assuming everyone's a bad faith actor you don't like, but I think we do have to build more tools. And I'll go back to that, building that long-term culture that at least in your community really kind of develops an inoculation effect against that those tactics are seen as problematic and kind of dismissed, versus at the national level where too often those are very effective. That's what gets people fired up and mobilized.
And also engaging more people in the conversation. The more people that are part of the process, the fewer bad apples you have, all told. And so thinking about that, and then remembering that as finance staff, as budget staff that are out in the community, you have such an important role to play in that you're representing the financial resources of a community, of a jurisdiction, and you're asking people their opinion on what should be done, how the priorities should be established, and when you allocate certain dollars and when you partner with other institutions in the community. Wow, such power and authority. So remember to use it wisely, to be just, to be thoughtful, and to be a little gracious with people who don't understand the process. We are so often, as public officials, used to people who come down all the time. They know the rules. They know it's 3 minutes. They know to walk up and give their name and address. But a lot of people, when you expand the process, don't know the rules of the game. So make certain that you include a way to tell people what to expect, what's going to happen, what the rules are, when to speak, etc., so that they feel comfortable coming the first time, and then they become more familiar with it over time, creating a community of practice or culture in your community of people being engaged and talking about public problems. And then lastly, I would say, please encourage your own staff and the leadership staff of the organization to think of their responsibility as to create spaces for civic learning. How can the budget staff and others in the organization use their knowledge and resources to help inform the larger public about the governance process and service delivery?